Welcome back to our YouTube channel. We have some more updates today on new changes that are expected to come out under the Biden administration. And President Biden announced 3 new executive orders, which we have mixed feelings about. There are some sign of positive changes. The changes are not, in our opinion, coming quickly enough or perhaps being strong enough, and we have a need for immediate reform. So anyway, it's kind of a mixed bag, but I'm going to go through the policies one by one. I'm not going to go into every single detail. I'm going to focus on what I think is most relevant for most of our clients and our viewers. And then, as always, we'll be doing our Facebook Live session on Friday where we can answer any questions that you might have. So the first order that I'm going to talk about, it puts a strong emphasis on appreciating immigrants and the value of immigrants to our community, our education system, our economy, our labor force, the importance of immigrants as essential workers during the pandemic, and the many contributions immigrants have made to the arts and sciences and business. So the attitude of the executive order is, what we want to see. In terms of what it does, it's aimed to promote the integration and inclusion of immigrants in our society and promote citizenship as well. As you know, under Trump, there was a very negative tone towards immigrants. This seems to be what this executive order is trying to push back against and combat. Specifically, it sets up a task force on new Americans, which is assigned with reviewing policies, identifying barriers to access to immigration benefits. So one specific example it gave of barriers were fee increases in a proposed rule that has been temporarily enjoined by the court, and I believe that lawsuit was actually dismissed. So that change never went into effect for us. The fee increases did not take place, but this is kind of memorializing that is one such obstacle for people with immigration benefits. There's not a lot of specifics in this section, so some things we might think about are processing times and long delays with immigration applications and the filing fees, and maybe some of the complications of the forms that have been implemented over the past 4 years. So again, not a lot of specifics here, but it did order the Secretaries of State, Homeland Security, and the Attorney General to submit a report within 90 days and then another report of progress in 180 days. It also specifically addressed the public charge rule, which again is it's based on a requirement that immigrants show that they will not become a public charge. That was done before by finding someone that would sponsor you and like a family member or spouse and agree to support you if you ever came into economic hard times. Under Trump, he attempted to add a bunch of additional requirements. So we are hoping that will completely be eliminated. That seems promising. This executive order also aims at promoting naturalization through reviewing the naturalization process and reduction of processing time. So as many of our clients know, people that are filing citizenship applications right now are waiting over a year to even get an interview scheduled, if not more. And also that the order talks about possible reduction of fees and increased use of waivers of fees for that application. I think the application's around $700 right now, so a fee reduction would be helpful. And review of denaturalization practices and policies. So under Trump, I believe he established a denaturalization task force, or at least made big efforts to increase denaturalizations, which historically have been very rare. So just an evaluation of the improper use of that and limiting that. And again, calling for a report on all of this within 180 days. The next executive order, I think, will be one of the least controversial, and that is aimed to address reunification of families. I think everybody knows what was going on with child separation. People might not know how intentional it was, so the administration knew the harm that would be caused to these children, these families in our society, by separating children from their parents. In fact, it's used as a form of torture in some countries to separate people from their children or from their parents, but it carried out these practices anyway, which is extremely harmful and inhumane. So the order demonstrates a commitment to protect family unity and to only separate children from their parents in extreme situations where there's an imminent threat to the safety of the child. Sometimes the Trump administration would use that imminent safety prong, but then would apply that in situations such as if a child had a wet diaper and the parent didn't have access to a clean diaper for the child, and call that an extreme safety risk. So while the language of that is promising, we're hoping that it's enforced in a way that truly is promoting family unity and not needlessly harming children through separation. The executive order also seeks to reunify parents and children that have been separated through granting parole and visas for family members to be reunited. It also allows for sending resources for trauma and mental health services for these families. And then it talks about sibling reunification too. All of this calling for a report in 120 days. So again, this is hopefully uncontroversial. Everybody understands, hopefully everyone understands how harmful that policy was and the need to remedy it as best as possible. I mean, permanent damage has been caused to children and their families, but at least hopefully there will be a huge effort to fix that. The third order is, to us, maybe one of the most relevant ones. It's aimed to address the causes of migration. And what that really means is that it's looking at conditions in countries such as Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, known as the Northern Triangle, where many of our clients are immigrating from, and also to examine the refugee system and the asylum system. I will also know that this is where we hope to see more, and we have not seen enough yet. Kind of the mission statement or the introduction of the order talks about how resources were needlessly used to target bona fide asylum seekers, or people that were truly in fear for their lives, when they should be targeted at trying to root out drug cartels and human traffickers at the border instead. This is, again, a confusing part of the order because obviously the situation in the Northern Triangle countries is very complicated and not something that could easily be fixed, especially by a foreign government such as the United States. But they are considering how to combat corruption, violence, domestic violence, economic insecurity, and give resources and development to these countries to, hopefully reduce the need for people to flee for their lives and come here. It also mentions an internal relocation and integration program, which is a little concerning because internal relocation, as many of our clients from these countries know, is not always something that can be safely done. If you're afraid in a country like Honduras, which is the size of New Jersey, it's very unlikely you can internally relocate somewhere else in that country and you wouldn't have the same fear. So not sure what the aim is there. Another concerning section talks at length about partnering with other countries closer to home to promote their asylum systems, and also maybe to have a labor program so there could be other visas available to people in countries closer than the United States. This section was not very detailed, but some causes for concern here are, Trump proposed to do this with trying to encourage people or force people to apply for asylum in neighboring countries or in Mexico, or to wait in Mexico and apply there. But as immigration lawyers, what most of our clients tell us and what we know from experience working with people and experts from these countries as well is that the borders are not safe. If someone is coming after you in El Salvador and you go to Mexico or Honduras, the chances that that person would be able to find you and persecute you are pretty high. It's not a situation where there's a lot of security between the multiple countries. The reason that many people come all the way to the United States rather than seeking safety closer to home is just that it's simply not an option, or not a safe option anyway. So we'll see what happens with that. There was also a provision for expansion of shelter networks. Immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers also often stay at shelters on their journey to the United States. Expansion of the shelter network, strengthening of the refugee program, and specifically considering reinstating CAM, the Central American Minor Parole program, which was paroling in certain Central American minors into the United States in certain situations. So again, we're hoping that program comes back. There was also a provision for considering paroling family members in for family unity purposes in family-sponsored immigrant visa categories. So those more remote family categories are often subject to long wait periods, anywhere from 5 to sometimes 10, 15, even 20 years. So the purpose of that would be to allow people to enter the U.S. with a temporary status while they're waiting for their turn to apply for the green card. So the next section of this executive order talked about policies and procedures at the border, called for a lot of review of processing of asylum seekers at the border, review of any public health related suspensions on processing. It did talk about reviewing or modifying the Migrant Protection Protocol, called MPP. We would much prefer that it immediately ordered termination of that program. Again, that is a program under Trump that required a lot of people to wait in Mexico for their hearing in shelters or churches, and then often come to the border for these tent hearings. If you Google it and look at the pictures, it's pretty frightening. And the conditions in Mexico where people were waiting are just really bad and insecure, and these people were already fleeing for their lives. And we would have liked to see this administration go farther to immediately end the program. However, it did then also mention that they were to examine how to safely and orderly allow into the US those who have been subject to the MPP program. So hopefully there's an intention to eliminate that as soon as possible and bring people safely into the US where they can have their asylum hearings in the immigration courts. It also urged a prompt review of many harmful asylum rules and bars to asylum that were proposed in regulations, many of which are already on hold in the courts. And it also called for stopping the bilateral agreements. The order also stops the prompt asylum case review system and a few other systems kind of aimed at getting people through the asylum process as quickly as possible, but without really respecting due process and probably increasing the number of denials of these claims. It importantly revoked the policy ending catch and release. So catch and release is the informal term for processing that was sometimes done during the Obama administration, where if, for example, a mother and her children came to the U.S. seeking asylum, but she had maybe a brother in Pennsylvania, rather than being detained at government expense indefinitely, she would be paroled in and released and given a court date. So, and she could go, for example, live with her brother. So that is a program that combated a lot of harmful detention practices. So hopefully there will be widespread use of catch and release rather than detention. Next, there is a review of the expedited removal process. And most importantly, within 180 days, the task force is supposed to examine rules, regulations, and decisions and guidelines related to asylum claims based on domestic violence and gang violence to make sure they are consistent with international standards. So under Trump, it has been much, much more difficult for those fleeing their countries due to domestic violence or gang violence to seek protection in the form of asylum. In fact, there was a case called Matter of AB that explicitly made this more difficult. We believe there should be examination of those policies and expansion of the grounds for asylum related to those issues. And then lastly, within 270 days, the particular social group grounds for asylum are supposed to be examined and clarified in regulations. So that's been an area where we've seen a tightening in asylum rules and policies. So we're hoping that with this examination to happen in the next 270 days, those categories are expanded and particular social group becomes an easier category to use for asylum. That's everything I have in terms of the executive orders. They were not as robust or as specific or as fast activating as we would have liked to see, but we have our ears open to see what other changes are coming. A few additional updates. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, has been confirmed as of yesterday. ICE has announced that it will not be targeting people at COVID vaccination centers in an effort to encourage immigrants to receive vaccinations. We meet this with skepticism, as ICE is in some ways still has some loyalty to Trump and the anti-immigrant side of that. So we hope that we can rely on ICE's word that they will not be enforcing anything at COVID centers. But again, we're not fully trusting of that order, but at least publicly that's a step in the right direction. So those are all the updates I have today. Again, we'll be doing our Facebook Live at 1 o'clock on Friday. Please feel free to come, bring any questions, and we look forward to continuing to bring you updates and continuing this conversation. Thank you. Take care.